Hello, my name's Jeff Froke, and I welcome and thank you for joining me on this program that I put together for you. I'll say a few words here and there, but mostly I want you to enjoy the photos and the paintings I've put together for you and a few other items, and I'll speak some words here and there, like I said. Here we go. Thank you for tuning in to this virtual program depicting real birds. Watching and studying birds was my useful pastime, my career as an ornithologist, and again my pastime today as a retiree, and now always to share what I've seen with people just like you. Every photo you're about to see, the color photos, were taken by me within 3 miles of the foundation, mostly near my home, which is near Bird Rock and Pebble Beach.
Joyful song with no beginning and no end. He ruffles up his feathers, he opens up his throat. He does not sing for pleasure, though there's rapture in each note. While you and I tell stories to explain and comprehend, to lull the baby into sleep, to tame the rain and wind. The bird in the wood sings a joyful song. It has no past or future, no beginning and no end, for time is not its master. Enchanted by the ray of light that sparkles in the sound. No past or future, no beginning and no end. We fill our days with striving, and regret can haunt the night, but the song of the thrush in the deep green wood recalls us to the light. What a gift to find a moment between the dark and dawn, when the universe is cradled in the heartbeat and the song. No past or future, no beginning and no end. The bird in the wood, no beginning and no end, for time is not its master.
John Burroughs, the 19th century naturalist, the sage of the Hudson, and essayist, offered this point of view for our program from his Nature at Home from 1919. John was one of the first inspirations that I found thumbing through the library at my high school that pointed me to want to intensely know about conservation in America. the wilderness movement at the turn of the century, and I read everything he had and love it and still read it. But he did have to say that
after long experience, I am convinced that the best place to study nature is at one's own home, no matter where that may be. One has it all about him then. The seasons bring to his door the great revolving cycle of wildlife, floral and faunal, and he need miss no part of the show.
it must have been a big day for schooling fish, possibly anchovies off the coast of Bird Rock. We get these every year, sometimes in January, not this January so far, but throughout the year, when thousands upon thousands, perhaps, and without exaggeration, 1 million seabirds, if you could count them off to the horizon, here close to shore where waters are under 60 feet deep, brown pelicans, and their accompanying us, the Herman's gulls, gather. It's so good sometimes that they don't even have to fly and sight and dive for the fish. They just swim along and pick them up. But they're great divers. All of the brown pelicans we have, all of the California brown pelicans nest either in the California Channel Islands or mostly in Baja California in the islands of the Sea of Cortez. All others just wander until it's time to breed, but mostly they nest here, or rather in the Channel Islands or Mexico, and they come here for the off-season, thankfully. 2 adults with the whiteheads. And as I say, they're always accompanied by the Herman's gulls. 90% of the world's population of this bird nests on one island in Baja, in the Sea of Cortez, Isla Rasa. You can find black turnstones throughout the year on the rocky shores of Monterey County, and mostly if they're here during summer, they're non-breeders, but they will travel back and forth. They're great travelers, nesting to the north. We only have one nesting shorebird in our area, and we'll get to that a little bit later. In fact, you'll see some proof and evidence of nesting. But now let's look at a visitor, a migrant who comes here to nest, not a shorebird, but a true water bird, the Pigeon Gull. What isn't there to love about Stillwater Cove and the Mimi Jenkins Pier at Pebble Beach? Try the sculpin sushi, and believe me, they eat a lot of sculpin, baby sculpin, in those shallow waters off of Stillwater Cove Pier. You can tell a Pigeon Guillemot pretty easily once you know some of these field signs. Black and white and red of mouth. Incredible birds, beautiful birds, very sweet. Here's a couple of dudes, 1-year-old western gulls. They take 2 years to mature, and they're sort of watched after more and more impatiently by their parents. More familiar, the western gull adult. Good parents, though. Do this for 2 years. Turnstones and surf birds and a black oyster catcher. Add to that some elegant terns who are here for a visit for a big fishing trip off the coast. Can you see the objects of its affection? This is why I think it's a good thing when people like to go shell fishing, or rather, I should say not shell fishing, but tide pooling and down to the beach to try to avoid the rocky areas during the late spring and summer, to give the black oyster catchers a break, because one passing group of people inadvertently will scare the birds off their nest a few times, and the birds will give it up, whether or not the nest is actually stepped upon. They'll feel the threat, the danger, risk, and throw up their wings and leave. And last year, of 18 nests, we had one succeed, and that was the worst ever. It's tough. Increasing tourism, just increasing people. Let's say COVID had something to do with it, more people out and about, not at work or school or wherever, but it was a tough year, and we can't have too many years of those in a row, or we'll really feel the threat of it. And they're too wonderful of a bird and too important of a bird to lose. But that's the black oyster catcher, a resident year-round, our only nesting shorebird. You might throw in the killdeer. Is a shorebird in a sense, more of a grass bird. We'll get to that later. Both parents will brood the eggs and take care of the young. The best way to watch them, from the side, with binoculars, but you really don't need them at some places. They'll be patient enough to let you watch them close enough on the other side of a fence. This little girl and her father are standing on the proper side of a simple barrier to keep them from crossing onto the nesting territory near Bird Rock again. Need this any introduction? Aldo Leopold, the father of American wildlife conservation, once wrote, "What a dull world it would be if we knew all about Canada geese." And what he really meant was, we know so much about this bird, we know so little. It's so full of mystery. It really is an incredible bird in terms of its social ecology and its biology. It's a monogamous, lifetime monogamous breeder. Male and female are together for life, and if when the bond breaks up by death, the other will lament and mourn perhaps for the rest of its own existence. They don't always remate. They're extremely closely bonded, and if you question that, just try a step between a male to the right, the larger one, and his nest and young, and mate during nesting season. Fierce, fierce, fierce protectors. It's a wonderful thing, really, to watch. They have a bad rap, of course. They leave a lot underfoot, but there really is more to them than what they leave underfoot. Nesting way out onto the rocks at the ocean front, as well as hidden about elsewhere near ponds and lakes. But they like to get to the edge where they have less foot traffic to threaten their eggs, because when their chicks wake up, they don't get up and run around, although they're capable of it. They're more likely to sleep for 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 10 days, just sleep. And then, boom, it's off to swim lessons, self-taught. It's the end of January, and these birds are here now in full force. The godwits and the willets. And come spring, it'll be the tree swallows, here in early arrival, as painted. And barn swallows. Barn swallows are interesting, and they get their name aptly because it's been over 200 years since barn swallows have nested in natural habitat in North America, longer in Europe. They left the caves and the natural cover for bridges and buildings and barns and such, which they much prefer, to the total exclusion of native cover, with one exception, and that's a colony out on the Channel Islands. They find great cover protection and safety in the little nooks and crannies that we build. Here underneath that very same bridge at Stillwater Cove. The cliff swallow the same way, except that they still nest in native habitat, the sides of mountains and cliffs and the like, but also under piers and bridges and highway overpasses on 101, and South County is certainly a place you'll run into vast numbers of cliff swallows in the summertime. And on the sides of the triple silo at San Lucas in the South County, if you're ever there in the summertime and want to see hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of cliff swallows on a vertical face of an old agricultural building by the railroad tracks. Probably one of the first birds, some authors say the first bird, to accommodate itself to our presence, to the settlers' presence, I should say, in California, to the buildings and barns and such, although I think the barn swallow probably was already underway, if that's what we've heard otherwise. But the black phoebe is very accommodating to us. All it needs is a drip of water, a little wet spot to claim habitat. It might even be a dripping faucet for a bug or two to form a colony in there, a bug eater. And then from the inland area, from the dry country to the east, they'll come for the winter here on the coast, the Say's phoebe. Two are related. Perhaps no introduction is needed. It says his name eponymously. If you read 2 Years Before the Mast by Henry Dana Jr., you might run across, you will, Professor N, or Dr. Nutty, or various names he was given. Old Curious is what the crew aboard the ship would call him, sailing back to Boston from California with a load of hides. And that was Thomas Nuttall, a zoologist working in California, for whom the Nuttall's woodpecker was named, and he had been a professor of Richard Henry Dana at Harvard, and the two of them ran into each other on a beach in San Diego absolutely randomly, and enjoyed talking about that, and that's when he gave him his connection with the book. But the Nuttall's woodpecker, long and convoluted story, is sort of funny. Here year-round in our oaks. One perhaps more familiar, certainly more numerous, it's a colonial woodpecker. Lives in family groups of up to 14, which is unusual for a woodpecker altogether, at least in our area. The great collector of acorns, stasher's store and retriever of its acorns. El Carpintero. And indeed, he, like a good carpenter, he measures his acorns, he measures his holes, and he finds the two to match perfectly. Not randomly or carelessly, but perfectly and carefully. His cousin, another woodpecker, more to the ground though, more of a ground woodpecker, is the flicker. This is how they do it. Poke a hole, poke it deep into the ground or a tree, and with a tongue that is immensely long, longer than most birds, but has tremendous strength because instead of coming out of the base of the mouth forward, I can't point to you here, but where ours does, let's say, it starts out in the front of the skull and wraps around. It goes in two pieces and it comes together at the back of the skull and then out the mouth. And that gives it awesome leverage. That's where the leverage comes in. Imagine a rubber band that had something to wrap around and give it the strength, and that's what it does. Woodpeckers have an immensely strong beak. They also, people have asked, how do they avoid getting concussions when they go about whacking their head against trees, or in the case of flickers that I've watched, oil drums for the sound, because they often do it for the sound as much as for creating holes in the trees. They have quite a well-devised brain and skull apparatus where the skull is all, this brain I should say, is all the way back and tightly packed against the rear of the skull, so it's cushioned by space in front of it, and there's no room for it to slosh or bang around inside its head where how a concussion would happen, but it's just perfectly packed, protected, and insulated. There's a lot of more to it, the way the bones squish and the like, but it's adapted. Don't try it at home, let's put it that way. We're not set up so well as that. This is one of the birds that started it all, the American conservation movement at the turn of the century in response to the feather trade and the millinery and the depredations on nesting egrets and other wading birds for their feathers for fashion, and turn of the last century, I should say, 1800s to 1900s. Snowy egret. And the feathers in the woman's hat here, the French would call it egrets. Ironically, about the same time the motor car was being widely developed, more widely developed, open-topped, usually high-seated vehicles for cruising down the avenue and what all, and women were finding that their hats were absolutely unsuited to that form of travel, so the feathers began to lose their fashion about that same period of time that the Audubon movement was really underway, and they started to stow their hats and put on a tighter, smaller cap, or hat, I should say, for fashion. And the feather works no longer apply. They'd leave them blowing all over the road. So fortunate for the birds, the automobile, let's put it that way, perhaps, ironically. The egrets, blowing in the wind from a great egret. Great fishermen, all of them. Here a blenny. Or a monkey face in the mouth of a black-crowned night heron. It took this bird half an hour to get the animal straight, lined up head first so it could get a proper swallow of it. And they put up a pretty good fight, a pretty good curl. There's a strong little fish. They're called an eel, but they're a fish. Although when they grow, they're about 3 feet long, so it's a good thing he got him when he's young, because as he got older, there would be no chance. Another hunter, of course, is what one author called, I like the author very much, can't think of his name at the moment, young bird author. This is a peregrine falcon for the vest pocket. Charles Hood, that's the guy. The little Kestrel, or American sparrow hawk was one name. And this is the grindings and doings on a golf course fairway by the mole cricket, one of the pests that golf course superintendents really are irritated by, and find a friend in Kestrel. If they haven't put out poisons, and fewer do, hopefully very few do, and they're patient and wait for kestrels and other predators to come around, they'll find that indeed they can be effective pest controllers. That's what we hope for, and it works. Same story. I think we all know about pocket gophers. Cute animals, fascinating ecology if they stay in their place, but they're so darn prevalent that a red-tailed hawk is a welcome animal to have alongside or somewhere nearby, because they're great predators of the gopher. Again, when poisons are left out of the equation, that can be a disaster otherwise for both animals, but all the way up to the hawk, certainly. Rather a signature bird of the 17-mile drive along the coast and elsewhere throughout the county and open country. Once down to 50 pairs in California before the 1970s. Perhaps as a result of pet poisoning. It's not entirely clear, but they're really headed downhill, and it is believed to be a response to post-World War II use of DDT. But the animals started to make a big comeback in 1970s, a reinsurgence of the field mouse or the vole, and the other adaptations, not entirely clear, but they've come back and they're doing quite well as long as the habitat's there. Farm country, golf courses, coastal grasslands. And the animal that's almost exclusively their diet, the hovering kite, the white-tailed kite. My parents are from North Dakota, and my mother always delighted in hearing who wouldn't? Blind nestlings unafraid, as Robert Russell Lowell would call them, lifting their heads to every shade, thinking them to be their mother, happily when their mother was the source of that shade. Alexander Wilson was the father of American ornithology, a Scotsman born to poverty, came to the United States to avoid being impressed to the weaver service in Scotland. It was well-read, self-educated, and became a teacher, and fortunately sidled up to the right people, William Bartram and other naturalists in North America, in Philadelphia in particular, and became really the hardest working zoologist, ornithologist that anybody had ever seen, and amazed John James Audubon and others. Predated much of Audubon's work, but wrote 9 volumes before his death, died of overwork just from feverishly producing the Encyclopedia of American Ornithology at that time. Was an amazing accomplishment for somebody who had just arrived 15, 20 years before. If you love song sparrows and you're interested in the history of women in science, particularly the challenges, no doubt, that women faced as they made their way and their place in science, and also finding happiness in birds in the face of sorrow. Those sort of 3 big areas. I don't know, there's lots of other take-homes about it. Pick up a copy of Research is a Passion with Me by Margaret Morse Nice. She is Mrs. Song Sparrow. She devoted her life to the study of the song sparrow and its social biology, and revolutionized the study of animal biology by focusing on a single population and knowing each and every bird individually without marking them, and without laboratory services and so forth. She blew everybody away, and this is in the early 1900s, and her book is an awesome statement of autobiography of what she accomplished with an amazing bird in Ohio. The song sparrow, the house finch, the golden crowned sparrow, the white crowned sparrow we saw a little earlier, and the dark-eyed junco, numerous others of the seed eaters, all love good seed at a bird feeder, the right time of year, and properly done. It's helpful, and a lot of fun as well. And I want to take you for a moment to a topic dear to me, and I hope is helpful to you. It has been to other people who feed birds. Just the basic most tips. And these were generated by my own dear mother, who was part of a research program that a friend and I put together. I'm just going to knock out the bullets here so I can look at them and not miss a point. This was back in probably 1980 or so. A friend of mine, Al Geese, from Maryland with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a biostatistician, and I were talking over dinner. Wouldn't it be nice if we really knew what birds wanted to eat? What would they prefer if they were given a choice? Because there were so many bags of seed for sale, still are, that have stuff that looks good, chickens will eat it, turkeys will eat it, a bird here and there will eat it, but most, I mean, truly most was going to waste, falling on the ground, rotting. Rats are coming to get it, raccoons are dining on it, and no bird would eat it. Cracked corn and so forth and so on. And it was just being put in because it was cheap, heavy, and the seed producers could get rid of it at a low cost to them and a high profit margin and so forth and so on. And it wasn't doing anybody any good. So we wanted to know, and we knew that the answer would be different across the country with different birds. So we said, let's have a geographically widespread program. How are we going to do this? How would we do it? He, the statistician, me, the biologist. And we said we wanted to have this program. We devised it over the napkin at first, and then a lot of work together to set up a program where it took 3 years, 200 days a year, and studying ultimately in California, Ohio, and Maryland intensively and smartly from a statistical standpoint. I'm not going to bore you too long, but it is helpful, I think. So we with this big program, we couldn't get enough confidence that we'd have graduate students who'd be willing to do this, because it was going to take 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off a day for 6 hours a day, every day for 200 days a year. Impossible. Who would do such a thing? And then the light bulbs went off in our heads, and we said, our mothers. His mother and my mother and another woman he knew in Ohio. The grandmothers will do it. So my mother said, oh, that sounds like fun. And his mother, I think she said the same thing. And we built the apparatus for these things, or I built them rather, and then he did the statistics. We set them out. The women went about their work and very carefully. They're beautiful biologists, sat in their lawn chairs with their binoculars and their clipboards and their notes, and they did all of the things that we asked them to do. And it was long and labored. And this is the result. White millet, black sunflower seed, period, with a little bit of safflower seed if you have titmice. Buy it in bulk. You don't buy the other mixes with all the other things in it. And if you really want to get simple, and if you really want to save money and give the birds what they really want, those two things, efficiency and effectiveness, just do black sunflower seed, black oil sunflower seed, skip the rest. Although I have titmice, so I like the safflower. The suet cakes are if you want to feed warblers and nuthatches and the like, the meat eaters who like to come in for suet. But for the seed eaters, black oil sunflower seed alone will do it, and you won't have waste, and you'll have a real happy bird life at your feeder, both the basket type of feeders and platform feeders. And then feed only October through March in our area. The rest of the year, birds don't need the seed, they don't want the seed, and if they pretend to, they really are just making you feel better. But it's a waste, because they need insects to feed their young, and the seed is only for carbos during the cooler parts of the year. Black oil sunflower seed, October through March, and you've got a perfect system. And I'll thank my dear mother for that. And on we go. Juncos approve. If you're a goldfinch, you fluff up to stay warm, and but you want to be careful where you fluff up. You don't want to look too big at the wrong time when a northern pygmy owl might be nearby. You might attract attention, like this one poor goldfinch did, what's left of it anyway. Not a common bird, the pygmy owl, but they're in our Monterey pine forest. And they're not much bigger than, oh boy, they're not much bigger than a robin in size, a little wider, a little muscular, more wider, but not much bigger overall. Small bird, nothing like the great horned owl, the female of which has a 5-foot wingspan. She's about 30% bigger than the male. They're a very large bird. King or queen of the forest. Then there's the barn owl, altogether a different owl, distantly related. Barn owls have their own family. This is the bird with asymmetrical ears, a big ear on one side, a little ear on the other side. That's in their skull, not on the outside. And they can change their face muscles to change the shape of their face to guide sound to their ears. And they use this combination to hear perfectly well in the dark when they can't see a thing. Even an owl with big eyes, relatively, can't see a thing in pitch black and can pick up a rodent and nail it first try, pinpointed by use of their absolutely incredible ear ability. See the big ear canal on the left side and small on the right as we face it. Nest in hollows, paired year-round. Male and female here look alike with the heart-shaped face. Up to 13 young. They like boxes in some areas. You might see them in wine country driving up and down the valleys. Fed the same bird as we've seen before, the vole and other field rodents. This vole's not happy about that. It's already picked on pretty heavily by the kites. That's life. We have a resident hummingbird, the Anna's, year-round. A little larger than all the others. It allows it to hunt down insects and spiders under the eaves and stay well-fed. Always has a small territory or a large territory depending on flowers and feeders if you feed them. And then in the summer arrives the Allen's hummingbird from the south, Mexico and Southern California, that will nest here and then go back after the season's over. Well, where there are quail, there very well may be nature red of tooth and claw. And what are we looking at here? Probably a quail that got separated or didn't quite heed the call. Cowbirds are riding them back, the deer and the herds. The cowbirds are the nest parasites. They lay their egg in the nests of other birds. Yellow warblers and many other birds are the hosts too. And can you pick out the cowbird egg? This is an adaptation a bird had that lived picking insects off of traveling buffalo herds. And it didn't really have time in its lifestyle in the Midwest to settle down, make a nest, lay eggs, and raise young when the herd was moving. So it just found a resident and to do the work for it as it traveled with the herd. Can you pick out the cowbird? They grow fast and larger, big enough to edge out and toss out the natives of the nest, so to speak. And to be fed and raised by the host parents very often. The western bluebird, young with those big baby lips. Another winter visitor for the same berries that the hermit thrush and the bluebirds and several other birds would eat, but those are the three principal berry eaters. Cedar waxwings are exceptional in that they eat exclusively berries and fruit. They don't eat insects or seeds or other things to round out their diet, and most animals would not be able to survive digestively, energetically with a diet like that. They excrete the excess sugars and fatty materials, fruity materials in the food out through their feathers, which is the theory, at least, how they get their waxy wings. And they have other digestive abilities as well. It's also one of the reasons that the cedar waxwing is not parasitized, if that's the correct word, by the brown-headed cowbird, because the cowbird chick would not be able to survive being fed an all-fruit diet that the cedar waxwing feeds its young. Up the tree, creeps up the tree. That's the brown creeper's method. Keeps it out of fights with a potential other would-be predator, or I shouldn't say predators, competitors. If you were to run into the nuthatches that go down the tree or out the tree, they crisscross, but they don't have to get in the same lane, go in the same direction. And that's competitive exclusion, we would call that, where they exclude having to do the same thing at the same time for the same purpose. You can only have so much of that going on the same tree, and then you have a squabble. Pygmy nuthatches are our residents, but they're not our only nuthatch on the Monterey Peninsula, Carmel, and Pebble Beach. And every few years there's an outbreak, an incursion. Well, there are different names for it, but the red-breasted nuthatches will show up. They'll come down from the mountains and the interior forests in numbers and start to take over. Last year, 2019, we had a big incursion of red-breasted nuthatches. Fun bird. Bouncing ping pong ball. Striking. Male and female. Related to the blackbirds. Blackbirds and orioles and grackles are all in the same family. The hooded oriole, if there are palms in your neighborhood, keep an eye out for kind of a ratchety-cratchety call that they give. And if you see something like a flame burning in the palm tree, keep a lookout. It could very well be a hooded oriole. We have them here. Almost as common as the dark-eyed junco. I'll leave it to you to remember what W.C. Fields might have called them. Cousin of the chickadee. One of my favorites, which is why I feed safflower seeds. And they'll nest in a nest box if you put one up in the right place at the right time, early in the year. along with chickadees. They like those as well. Same box. They'll squabble over them. Here's a test. No. They're cousins. Like the mockingbird, its cousin, the California thrasher, will remember parts of hundreds of bird species calls. Well, every good professor would wrap it up in 55 minutes, so we're just about to make it, and that's only by luck. I looked at the clock. So I thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to give special thanks to the beautiful woman who sang Bird Song at the beginning. She and Steve Gillette are awesome. I've been following Steve Gillette since I was in high school. He came and would perform in local gymnasiums and colleges, and I would see him when I could, and he'll come to town here in Monterey from time to time with Cindy now that they're together, and they've got several albums and exquisite writers and folk singers and more than that, people. Any questions about or comments about this program or about birds? Please contact me. I love to talk about birds. If you've got ideas or, like I say, questions or rotten tomatoes. I like cherry tomatoes best. They don't hurt as much. And anything. If you have any inquiries about bird feeding, tips I might offer or clarifications, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.